Dear attendees, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This panel will talk about the Syrian war and the continuity of instability, and if there is any solution in sight, any possible solution in sight. In this panel, we will have Mr. Nicholas Granter, the U.S. envoy to Syria, to northeast Syria. Also, Dr. Ahmed Waisal, chairman of Middle East Studies, and Ibrahim Bro, member of the delegation and negotiation commission, and also member of the external relations of the Kurdish National Council. In fact, the international legal basis is available to stop the war and to solve the crisis in Syria, and this is represented in the UN Security Council Resolution 2254, when there is a clear roadmap to stop the war and to overcome the crisis and to cease fire and to form a credible government, and also to put a new constitution for the state and to have elections within 18 months. But this resolution was issued in December 2015, and now we are in the first quarter of 2023, and the status quo is that the war is ongoing and the crisis is deepening. Some experts and observers, they take that back to the defect in the international community to impose United Nations Security Council Resolution 2254. The Russian had many and represented his country as ambassador in many countries here, and also political advisor, and also he is the advisor for the political affairs for the Central Command, and he was appointed in 2022 representing his country in northeast Syria. And as soon as he started his position, he visited northeast Syria and he conducted a series of meetings with military, political and administrative and also political parties, and also the representatives of the components of the area. And now he is with us. Welcome, Honorable Ambassador. The main question is that after having all of these years, after the United Nations Security Council 2254, and after having other parties involved and other points involved in this, which is the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and also the mediation of the Russia to have new relations between Turkey and Syria. Do you think that there will be a solution in Syria under international leadership, and who is the party who has the key to open this horizon and outlook in front of the solution?
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and good afternoon. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person today, but it still is a pleasure for me to join you virtually to discuss the situation in Syria and prospects for a solution to the crisis, and to answer those very good questions that you just posed to me. This month, March, marks the 12th year that Syrians have been confronted with a tragedy on an unimaginable scale. As we well know, war, terrorism, atrocities, displacement, chemical weapons attacks, enforced disappearances, COVID-19, cholera, and now the recent earthquakes are just some of the horrible things that Syrians have had to endure over the last 12 years. At the outset, I would like to express condolences for the tragic loss of life and destruction across Syria and Turkey from the earthquakes last month. As we continue to help Syrians in the aftermath of the earthquakes, the United States has not forgotten about the suffering that the Syrian people have endured at the hands of the Assad regime and its backers for more than a decade. In helping Syrians recover from the earthquakes, the United States remains clear in our policy that it is unacceptable for the Assad regime to exploit this natural disaster for its benefit while it has not been held accountable for its innumerable atrocities, some of which rise to the level of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Now, after more than a decade of conflict, we are realistic that prospects remain limited for advancing a political solution worthy of the Syrian people who bravely demanded change 12 years ago. Against this bleak backdrop, however, the United States remains committed to advancing a just political settlement in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. As you noted, it was passed in 2015. Much time has passed, but we do remain committed to advancing this political settlement in line with 2254. The United States also remains focused on improving conditions for Syrians, pursuing justice for those wronged by the Assad regime, and mitigating the risks to Syria's neighbors of this terrible conflict. Now, the core of U.S. policy in Syria remains focused on 4 priorities aimed at improving the situation for Syrians on the ground and advancing a political solution. The first priority is ensuring the enduring defeat of ISIS or Daesh. The second is improving access to humanitarian aid. The third is keeping violence down across the country by maintaining ceasefires. And the fourth priority is promoting accountability for atrocities by the Assad regime and other malign actors. All 4 of these priorities support conditions that are necessary for achieving a political solution under 2254, which remains the best internationally supported framework for resolving the Syrian crisis. The United States continues to support the Syrian opposition, Syrian civil society, and other key stakeholders to engage in a Syria-led political process and other diplomatic efforts of 2254. And we believe it is important to advance all aspects of Resolution 2254, which include releasing arbitrarily detained persons, maintaining a nationwide ceasefire, and creating conditions that will eventually allow for the voluntary, safe, and dignified return of refugees. We are acutely aware that the economic situation in Syria is worse now than at any time since the start of the crisis. The humanitarian needs are also the highest that we have seen. These humanitarian needs are compounded not just by the recent earthquakes, but also by the COVID-19 pandemic, a cholera outbreak, historic levels of drought which have decimated food crops, and the terrible effects of Russia's war in Ukraine on global food security. The United States is proud to be the leading donor of humanitarian aid for the Syrian people, and we are working hard both to deliver aid to the Syrian people and to expand humanitarian access across the country. Since the start of the crisis, the United States has provided more than $15.7 billion in humanitarian assistance throughout Syria and the region. Also, in response to the recent earthquakes, we have announced another $185 million in additional funding for the response in Syria and in Turkey. But beyond our own assistance, the United States is encouraging partners in the region and beyond to do more to help the Syrian people. And we are working to ensure as many crossings as possible remain open to the UN and other humanitarian aid. We also are making crystal clear that U.S. sanctions do not deter urgently needed disaster relief. We issued the Temporary General License 23 to make clear that earthquake-related assistance is explicitly allowed to all affected areas of Syria. Despite this, we still oppose reconstruction directed by or for the Assad regime, and we are not about to lift sanctions against the Assad regime or its enablers. This is particularly true in the context of our efforts to help victims of the earthquakes. Let me be abundantly clear. The United States will not normalize relations with the Assad regime without authentic and enduring progress toward a political solution. and we do not support others normalizing relations either. Other countries have engaged the regime or are considering doing so for a number of reasons, including to address their own security concerns. We urge these countries to carefully consider the regime's atrocities against the Syrian people over the last 12 years, as well as the regime's continuing efforts to deny access to humanitarian aid and security. Countries engaging with the regime should seek outcomes beneficial to the Syrian people, such as earthquake relief and fulfillment of goals under 2254. Ultimately, the United States believes that stability in Syria and the greater region can only be achieved through a political process that represents the will of all Syrians. Beyond the Assad regime's intransigence, other actors continue to threaten regional stability and the pursuit of a political solution to the conflict. Iran continues to help prop up the Assad regime, while Iranian forces and Iranian aligned forces play a particularly destabilizing role in Syria, as they do in other parts of the region. Russia's military campaign in Syria in support of the Assad regime has led to massive destruction, as well as the death or displacement of hundreds of thousands of civilians. Like Iran's destabilizing activities, Russia's military operations undermine conditions for a political solution to the conflict. And Russia has not exerted any real effort to induce meaningful changes in the Assad regime's appalling behavior towards the Syrian people. Meanwhile, ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria still pose enduring threats. In particular, there are thousands of ISIS fighters in detention centers in northeast Syria. At the same time, tens of thousands of people, many of them children, are living in miserable conditions in overcrowded camps. Many of the people in these camps and detention centers are not Syrians. The United States applauds those countries which have repatriated their nationals from northeast Syria, and we urge all other countries with citizens in northeast Syria to repatriate them. We also are exerting tremendous efforts to facilitate these repatriation. Beyond our humanitarian assistance, the United States provides assistance to stabilize communities and keep ISIS from regaining a foothold in Syria. Our stabilization activities focus on mitigating economic insecurity, restoring essential services in areas liberated from ISIS, and supporting the return and reintegration of displaced Syrians. All of these things and all of the priorities that the United States is pursuing in Syria, keeping violence down, expanding access to aid, promoting justice and accountability, and ensuring the enduring defeat of ISIS, all of these priorities are important steps advancing a broader political solution to the Syrian conflict consistent with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. While the United States is realistic about the many challenges to reaching such a political solution, we remain committed to achieving a stable, just, and enduring peace for the Syrian people. Thank you.
شكرا سعادة السفير. سنواصل دكتور.
Dr. Ahmed, we will continue. Now there is something called a reconciliation pathway between Syria and Turkey, or at least we can say there are efforts for these reconciliations to encouraged by Russia, and Russia is effective in the Syrian dossier. There is a disagreement of vision about the motive of this peace or reconciliation. They say that is a tactic by Turkey because of elections, and some say Turkey they need to open some commercial roads with Syria and from there to the Gulf countries, and some others say that Turkey's objective is to have an understanding with Syria to finish the autonomous area by the Syrian Democratic Forces. But after earthquake, I mean, no talks have become less about this, but now we see some Russian statements now again in this regard. The crucial question is that what does Turkey really want from this step with Damascus? Is it a turning back from the Turkish strategy or Turkish vision in the beginning of the Syrian conflict. We know that Turkey was supporting the Syrian opposition to topple down the regime, but in Astana this turned into an understanding through Russia and Iran, and now there is this stage of reconciliation again with Syria and in Damascus. What does Turkey really want from this, and is there any major change in Turkey's vision regarding Syria? Thank you, Mr. President. Turkey supported the Syrian people, including all the components, Arabs, Kurds, supported the Syrian democracy, but the Americans, to all my respect to the Mr. Ambassador's speech, the Americans, they sold the Syrian revolution and other revolution. And Turkey stayed to support the Syrian opposition, and even America wanted to punish Turkey through supporting PKK in Syria, but this is not possible. When the Russians interfered and the Iranians, America didn't disagree and didn't, in comparison with what America did in Ukraine. And now there is pressure on Russia and all these countries. But on the other hand, America didn't do anything. In particular, Obama. When Turkey noticed that the West doesn't have any intention to solve the problem, then the real actors, in Syria were Iran and Russia. In Astana, Turkey met with those parties, and this led to the stop of displacement and immigration. It was a kind of ceasefire in Syria, and procedures were taken also against PKK. So it's the same logic. America now supports the Syrian democratic forces to fight Daesh, but in fact America supports PKK for 40 years. It's not new. Of course, regarding Turkey and Turkish policy, of course, we have elections, and this pressure on Turkey to send back the Syrians and the refugees. This maybe other calculations, because with the Ukrainian war, because Turkey stayed neutral and didn't bias to any side. And there was discussion started with the Syrian. It's not normalization, it's discussions. We all want Syria to be stable and to be a place suitable for the Syrians to live in, and we don't like to make them Shia or exclude the Sunnis, because this is a demographic change and we do not accept this. And also the Shiaization policy, it's not the same. This not for the interest of the countries in the region, including Turkey. So we need to move to find a solution, but not at the expense of the Syrian people. And now the Syrians, we have Syrians in Turkey. They are better than the ones in Jordan and in Lebanon, but we still need a solution. And Turkey is maneuvering a little bit. But after the earthquake, there is a real change, because the earthquake is a real. But maybe that was something good, and maybe something that turns to be good, and because this unified between Syrians and Turks, like the youth from Trabzon, from Istanbul, from the west, and they went to these disastrous areas to help their brothers and this created a kind of unity and support, and this is good, and this changed the sensitivity against the Syrians in Turkey, because this disaster, of course, the natural disaster, it's a humanitarian situation, and the Syrian also now, I wrote in 2015, as 5-6 years ago, it's all possible that one day we will be refugees, and now the Turks became refugees against their will, and this creates a kind of sympathy, and this decreased pressure on the government, and they silenced the racists when they see disaster. They silenced the people. If racists want to move people against Syria or against refugees, now they were silenced, and they are less now. And maybe Assad can decrease also pressure theoretically. For Assad's regime, it's a proxy. They don't have anything to present. It's a proxy for Russia and Iran. And the Democratic Forces, Syrian Democratic Forces, are a proxy for America. So the Syrian people are between Assad and the Qassad. So there is no problem to talk about the implementer of the project. We all see that Assad's regime can't provide anything to solve the problem or the Syrian crisis. Or they don't have anything to rebuild Syria. What can it provide? They say it's a crisis, and we don't need any solutions. So this, I think, needs us to move, because this situation is not for the interest of anyone, and it's not for the interest of our brothers, the Kurds, because this serves Assad's regime. Iran also doesn't have any project to solve this issue, so maybe it's a pressure to Turkey with the Geneva agreement, and they want a legal and lawful solution. And finally, Turkey supports opposition in the north, and these lands also were shaken with the earthquake, but the Arab countries were late. UN was late. America, beautiful speech, but they were late also. It's a disaster. I mean, there is fire in our house. At the same time, we send aids to north of Syria. Finally, we need coordination. The West supports the Ukrainian war with billions of dollars. There are disastrous Syrians, billions of Syrians are. Those who are under the ruins, but in brief, Turkey, there is an internal force now. They gathered $6 billion internally donation, and this sum increases every day to solve the problem internally. Also, we thank the Arabs, the Kurds, for their donations, but honestly, still. It's a big challenge to rebuild in the northern Syria, also southern Turkey. But Turkey, with the aid, they do everything. But some brothers were late. We also appreciate the region in Kurdistan, the KRG, to send aid and relief, and to stand with us in Turkey and Syria, and this was very good. I end here if there is any question. Mr. Ibrahim, about the Syrian opposition after it was supported.
بگمان چندین هزی کاریگرمان هەیە لە ناوچەکەدا لە و ئەبینین کە هەمانجی و کۆدەنجی هەیە. Sorry, we see that the Syrian opposition was opted to stop the Geneva agreement and did not allow a comprehensive agreement on for the issues that we faced in Syria. So then they moved towards Astana, where, as we see, that they were only exchanges between the regional states outside the frameworks of 2245 agreement or resolution. And now we see that there is a direct outreach towards agreement to agree with the Syrian regime. The opposition, do you think that the Syrian opposition has any other option other than this one and to go along with the Turkish agreement with the Syrian under the supervision of the Russian, or do you think that the Syrian opposition has other options? Thank you very much for the Rudau Research Center. Still, the international agreements that was reached by the Syrian opposition, which was made of 7 different components, including the Kurdish National Council, and still, despite the slowness of the process and the lack of outcomes in Geneva, these attempts are not stopped. It's still ongoing, but the issue in Syria has been ongoing for a while, for a long time. Before the Ukrainian war, before the Russian-Ukrainian war, there was a neglect of the Syrian case, and particularly the Syrian people's situation. But when the Ukrainian war broke out, this situation is even more complicated now. The international community reached or they deal with the Syrian issue as a humanitarian issue only, and this affects us as Syrians and affects the Syrian opposition in general. Yeah, the Syrian opposition, yes, of course, there are many directions, parallel directions to the Geneva direction or to the Geneva agreement, but Geneva is different and is not a replacement of all others, or Astana is not also a replacement for Geneva, for Sochi. The international community. The international community's treatment with the situation was not consensual. There was no consensus at the. Since 2012, there was international dispute about the Geneva announcement and about Geneva agreement. 2245 resolution was there was an agreement on a political settlement based on different stages and steps, but the states did not deal with the Syrian case from a political standpoint, and there was no political consensus to reach an international resolution, an international decision or commitment to stand against the regime. So that's what they only limited themselves to economic sanctions. So even until now, they say that we don't want to naturalize the situation with the regime. We don't want to lift the economic sanctions, yet we don't want to intervene in the Syrian affair. So that's why we see that there are many dictatorial systems have been removed, have been disposed through armed forces, but no regime was disposed because as a result of economic sanctions. So some of the dictators were removed by the popular uprising, not as a result of economic sanctions and international decisions. And also we witnessed that the American positions changes as the ambassador mentioned. We don't want to naturalize the situation with the regime. And when Mr. Jeffrey was, keeps saying that we don't want settlement with the Syrian regime or settlements by any other states. What is not accepted. So the situation is prolonged. Yet we see that there is an opening by some other states. We see the parliamentarians from different Arab states visiting Damascus, from Jordan, from Egypt, and the head of the regime also visited Amman. Kingdom of Oman and Turkey, as we sense that they are trying to reach an agreement with or settlement with the regime. The current earthquake, the latest earthquake, have created some room to get the regime and the Syrian regime and Turkey closer to each other. We know that Turkey is a country, is a state that has many interests in Syria and has a long borders with Syria, and there is expected elections in the horizon in Turkey, and all of these have impacts on the opposition and on the ruling party. We don't think that the Turkey will ask something from Turkey and Turkey ask or regime ask something else. So is it possible is it possible that the regime will honor any agreement, for example, for removing the coalition forces and the Turkish forces in there, or to end the self-rule government established in northeast of Syria? And the Turkey cannot give anything without asking for anything else in return. So the scenarios, the upcoming scenarios and upcoming possibilities is only to have a political solution, political settlements, and I think no side will win the war. That's why political settlement is the only solutions, and this requires international commitment to the decisions, the national decisions and agreements. Ms. Rania, you visited northwest of Syria. I think you also had a project about media in Idlib governorate. I think we know that there is Tahrir al-Sham, Hayat Inqaz, in those forces in that area, which is different from the areas under the control of the opposition. They have different governments in those areas. Do you think that the situation in northwest of Syria can be an example for the solution, for the political solution for Syria? And do you think that all of those forces that exist in Syria will agree on such a settlement? Please, very briefly. First,
there are a few things that I would like to talk about before I answer that question, please. I have the honor today of meeting with the president of BCF from the Barzani Foundation, and I would like to thank BCF, the Barzani Foundation, under the direction and the leadership of President Barzani, for being the first responders to the Syrian people, giving them aid. What the BCF Foundation did was something that nobody else was able to do. You broke all the rules. Your actions of kindness speaks volumes. Your presence in Afrin, in Syria, your help that is not conditional, that is not based on affiliation, is absolutely amazing. I am here on behalf of the Syrian people, thanking you, thanking President Barzani and the leadership of BCF. As far as the Northwest is concerned, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a Syrian American. I'm a proud native of Damascus, and I'm also a proud native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In 2011, I saw what was happening and how the Assad regime was killing people. In 2012, I made my first trip to the northwest of Syria. The things that I saw and witnessed were just horrific. Volumes of horror can be told about what the Russians, the Iranians did to the innocent civilians in Syria. The collaboration of evil was very evident. The last time I left Syria was in July of 2019, when the Russians killed, before my eyes, 42 human beings. They used a vacuum bomb. People were in pieces. I had to carry pieces off the ground. They wanted to kill everybody indiscriminately, whether there's militants, and there were no militants in the city that we were in. I had a non-profit organization called Shine. We had a university, a small private university in the Northwest, and we were trying to educate people and give them an opportunity for a job so they don't have to go to the other extreme. And the Russians, the Iranians, and their access, unfortunately, from here, were helping them. In the 7 or 8 years that I was in the Northwest, I saw the Russians and the Iranians become, without mercy, indiscriminate shelling was taking place on a daily basis. Barrel bombs, Scud missiles, airplanes that were shelling on a daily basis. There were times that we were carrying diapers and a bottle of Coca-Cola because we thought that the Russians and the Iranians and the Assad regime were going to kill us with chemical weapons. If it wasn't for the administration of President Trump, the Russians would have probably used chemical weapons on Idlib. What is the solution? It's very simple. The solution is for a collaborative international effort to make sure that Assad is gone. Not only gone, but also held accountable. There will be no peace in Syria as long as Assad is there. And lastly, I would like to say one thing to everyone here. Syria will never, ever go back to 2011. Syria will never be under Assad's regime control again. To us, to Syrians, I'm going to speak as a Syrian now. He is a criminal that should be put on trial, that should be held accountable by everyone, and it is just amazing. It is just very disappointing to see that there are people here in Iraq, in Baghdad, that are actually still supporting Assad. And I'm here to ask you, please, to speak to your governments, to speak to your officials, to say that you as the people will not allow this to continue. It is your voice. It is what you say, what you do, how you act. It is you in not being silent about how innocent people are getting killed. There are moms, there are children.
I think time is running and time is over, and we've not been able to cover all the points that we were planning. Thank you very much for my guests, my dear guests, and thank you very much for you all for listening to us.